in 20 years in the industry and helping so many other higher education institutions, you've probably gotten a really good sense for what are the biggest problems that global engagement executives are having today. What are the things that they're having to deal with? If you had to think of what are the top two or three, what would they be? And then we'll talk a little bit about maybe what some of the solutions are to those.
I've found that it really depends on the size and landscape of the institution itself. So the question assumes that there is an executive who has been tasked with global education and the oversight of internationalization of the institution to some degree. And in some cases, that doesn't exist. And so then it becomes an education and a practice of getting buy-in from stakeholders at the university to help them understand why this is critical to growth and to the global economy if we're talking about taking a wider view of this. And in some instances, there are executives that are tasked with internationalization and oversight of the different components of IE that don't have necessarily the buy-in or budget to grow that area or deepen that area in a way that would be meaningful. And then you have others that do have that oversight and ability to deepen and to grow. But one of the primary challenges I see in those cases are the plodding slowness that higher education can operate with sometimes. There is a trope out there about everything is done by committee. And I think there's a lot of value to that because it's a democratic way to view things, but often it does slow processes. And when you're faced with something like COVID or a real need for changing policy and practice for DEI reasons, then that slowness can inhibit your ability to move things forward. So that's often a challenge that I've seen. If internationalization exists as a component of the strategic plan, then it becomes much easier to create a path for resource, for budget, for buy-in. But it sometimes doesn't exist at all. But you're still inviting international students into your school. And so there's still a need to support those students. Or you still have students that want to go abroad and bring that learning back to the institution, but there's no mechanism with which to advocate for that sort of thing. So when it's incorporated, it is much easier and the path is much more clear. And then there are schools that have a whole plan for internationalization, a strategic plan unto itself for how they want to roll out the internationalization of their campus. And that's when you have buy-in from the very top, and it sort of seeps down to the practitioners that are advising students, to the people that are negotiating partnerships with institutions abroad. So it's a whole spectrum. And this is where I think the coming together of people in our community around things like NAFSA and conferences of any kind is deeply critical to pushing that agenda forward and making sure that it stays on the map for folks in administration and higher ed. Is advocacy and sharing of knowledge and sharing of practice and how that came to be in the first place. But it's a slow road. And when you talk about strategic plans, they're often 5-year plans, right? So none of it happens overnight. And the concepts are often very broad. You might have a goal to internationalize the curriculum, for example, which requires some definition, right? What do we mean when we talk about the internationalization of the curriculum? What would the outcomes of that look like? And are we all on the same page with those definitions? So it can look really different institution to institution. But I think the key is continued conversation and continued, I keep using the word advocacy, but it's almost pushing and being loud and making sure that you're consistently putting things in front of your administration, as well as coming together with the larger community to understand what worked and what didn't in other cases.